Okay. Um, right. Uh, let's pick up the second contractualist thinker. The first was uh, Thomas Hobbes, uh, and the next thinker, sorry about that. The next thinker is John Locke. Uh, John Locke is perhaps the most influential of all modern philosophers, especially in the Anglophone world. Anglophone world is where people speak English, and he's one of the most influential figures. And he is somebody who laid down the various different protocols that are necessary for understanding things in the modern period. He's a truly modern thinker. He's not just a philosopher. I told you that he was also a political economist. Now, when people talk about political economy, the two very major schools of political economy that people talk about are actually those which are called classical political economy and Marxist political economy. When people talk about classical political economy, they don't talk only about John Locke. People talk about Adam Smith, who was more or less a contemporary of John Locke. And Adam Smith's work, which is titled Wealth of Nations, is considered to be not just an work on economics, but it is also supposed to be a work of political economy. And it is also a rejection of, it is also a rejection of the kind of uh, economics that was advocated by uh, the school of economists who are called physiocrats. Uh, I'm sure you have done all this in your economics, or I hope you have done all this in your economics. I can't be very sure if you have. But one should remember that if we are talking about political economy, modern political economy, apart from Locke and Smith, some people do include David Ricardo and even Thomas Malthus. Okay. Now, the last two people as political economists is, I mean, the last two being Ricardo and Malthus. Their being political economists is a little doubtful. So you shouldn't use that as an argument, because if there are two people who tell you that they are political economists, and there will be another two people who will tell you that they are not political economists. Now, even Adam Smith should not be considered to be a political economist. He is more of an economist, and there is hardly anything in him which we would call political. Okay, there is very, very little uh, content content in his writings which can be termed political, and that is for a reason. What one finds in Adam Smith is a complete rejection of any form of authority. Adam Smith did not want any kind of authority. He wanted to have a system of life which ultimately connects to the idea of the free market. And he thought that a free market, if it comes into being, and he believed it will come into being, and he thought that if that happens, there is absolutely no necessity to have any kind of authority at all. That is what he believed in. And therefore, he does not talk about political organization. He doesn't talk about institutions which are political. But John Locke is not like that. Though people will tell you that John Locke is a political economist, and by doing so, they are putting political in front of economy. John Locke also was not really somebody who did believed in the development of the political beyond a certain extent. He is reluctant to have the institution of the state, but he says it has to exist. I'll give you the reasons for that. His argument is that the state is a necessary evil. Okay, it is necessary, but he sees it as an evil, potential evil. Okay, not something that is already evil, but something that can become potentially evil. Now, by the time that Locke started writing, individualism had developed far, far more than what we see in Thomas Hobbes. What we see in Thomas Hobbes is not too much of individualism. There is individualism in him, there's no doubt about that. But when it comes to Locke and even Adam Smith, they are complete individualists. If you ask Locke to define society, he says society is an aggregation of individuals. Aggregation is a coming together of individuals. And unlike Aristotle, who believed that if there was no society, there would be no individual. I hope you remember that. And I also gave you an example where I said, can you have a soldier without having an army? Okay, if you want to have an army, I'm sorry, if you want to have soldiers, you'll need to have an army. You have to create an army, right? Then you can recruit people as soldiers. This is at the level of ideas. Please remember, this is all at the level of ideas. So you think that we require a military, and therefore you create soldiers. You create different officers with different ranks. That is the kind of thing that Aristotle is talking about. But the individualists and strong individualists like John Locke, much stronger than Hobbes, despite Macpherson calling Hobbes a very, very possessive individualist. Lockean individualism is even more stronger and even more possessive than Hobbesian individualism. So for him, there is no such thing as common good. Okay, there is no such thing as common good. And he believed that all things which are good have to be pursued by individuals. Okay, and society is just an agglomeration or an aggregation of individuals. Now, like I said, he's also considered to be the first true political economist. While there is a great deal of economics in him, which will come through as we keep progressing, you'll find out how much economics is there in Lockean thinking. You will also have to admit that Locke is a far more evolved thinker than Adam Smith. In Adam Smith, you find a naivety where he seemed to think that if you have a self-regulating free market, then there is no necessity for any other kind of institutions. Locke is not like that. Locke can foresee problems even if there is a free market. He believed that there was a necessity for some kind of authority to protect the free market, not to regulate the free market. Please remember that. Okay, he was not trying to regulate the free market. He was trying to protect the free market. And in doing so, he became the first political economist because he suggested political institutions as the ones that will be used for the protection of the free market. He's, like I said, one of the most influential philosophers of the modern period and of all periods of time. Most definitely the greatest Anglophone philosopher. And his influence comes right down to the 20th century. And you see his influences on John Rawls and Robert Nodzick. Now, John Rawlsian liberalism is slightly different from Lockean liberalism, but the influence is there. Okay, without doubt, there is an influence. What Rawls was trying to do was to improve upon what was considered to be, he was trying to improve upon the ideas of John Locke and make them more tangible in a changed context. The 17th and 18th century context is very, very different from the 20th century uh, reality. Okay, and therefore, Rawls suggests some very fundamental modifications, if you like, not just to the thinking of John Locke, but to liberalism itself. So first and foremost, no, I won't get there now. And then there is Robert Nodzick. Robert Nodzick is much closer in terms of his ideas to John Locke. And in fact, he almost rehashes John Locke and makes an argument for having a state which he calls the night watchman state. We'll discuss the significance of that once we are proceeding with this. Now you must understand one thing here. When we are talking about the state, what is the root of the word state? Okay, the root of the word state is estate, E-S-T-A-T-E. You say real estate. What is real estate? Real estate is land, right? It's basically land. So what you find as the state pertains to the land. Pertains to the land. It pertains to the idea of the estate, but it does so in a way which is very, very different from how things were in the medieval and in the ancient periods. In the ancient period, the estate was not at all important. And in the medieval period, I told you, everything was considered to be the domain of God. So it's in the modern period that we see that there is the creation of this particular idea of the state. In fact, the French Parliament, it's no longer called that, but when it was first founded, it was called the Estates General, or simply the States General. And who were the members of this parliament? The members of this parliament were those people who held land. The feudal system that saw these people who were called the nobles or the nobility, okay, they were all those who owned land. We had a feudal system in India, which was also based on land, We call it the zamindari system, right? So you have the zamindar, over him you have the subedar, then the mansabdar. So there's a hierarchy. In England also, you had a hierarchy. You had a lord, you had a, what should I say? You had a, on top of the lord, you had a duke, not a duke, I'm sorry, what am I saying? A baron. Over a baron, you had a duke, and then you had an earl, and so it went, the hierarchy. So these were people who were in charge of land. So the word state is used in the modern period to denote what we think is land. So what kind of land? Does it mean there was no holding of land before? There was holding of land, but it was very different, and I'll come to that. Now, apart from being a political economist, an idea which we still have to discuss, apart from being a liberal, an idea that we still have to discuss. What is liberal? Who is a liberal? Right? We have to discuss those. And while we are discussing those, before we discuss those, I just want to run through some of these important things and then get into the discussion of those particular ideas. You will see that Locke is an extremely strong supporter of the capitalist economic system. Okay. And he's a complete believer of the four frees that I talked to you about yesterday. Free thinking, freedom of speech. Please don't call it free speech. I told you free speech was a word used by Thomas Jefferson to indicate that the United States of America will negotiate with any other country that it likes, and that it will no longer accept the monarch of England as the head of the United States of America. They said we are coming out of the Commonwealth. That was the Declaration of Independence. And Jefferson used the word free speech for the first time there. But otherwise, it's freedom of speech. Free will. Free will is your ability to determine yourself. Now, please remember that free will comes with great responsibility. So let me give you a very, very stupid example. Okay, because I believe that stupid examples sometimes serve purpose of explanation very well. In India, we have this system of arranged marriages. Okay, so if your parents arrange a marriage for you, they find a match, they decide that the girl is suitable for you people, or that the boy is suitable for someone else. What do you see? You see that the parents have taken the responsibility for the arranged marriage. So if something goes wrong, you'll say, what kind of wife Or what kind of husband did you find for me? But just imagine if you said, I will marry a person that I like, and you identify a person and say, I want to marry this person. That is exertion of free will. You have exerted your free will there. But along with that comes the responsibility to make the marriage work. Because you took the decision to marry someone, you have to make the marriage work. If something goes wrong, nobody else is responsible for that. You are responsible. So please remember one thing. All these freedoms that we are talking about come with responsibilities. They come with tremendous responsibilities. If you look at what happens in the United States of America, they have the system that pedestrians, okay, people walking, have the right of way, which means that if a pedestrian is crossing the road, a person who's driving a vehicle will have to stop for that person who's crossing the road. Okay, so there you have freedoms, but you also have responsibilities. So there is that famous quotation of Dewey's, I think, which said, freedom without responsibility is license. So all freedoms basically come with responsibilities. Be it free thinking. If you have a thought and you want to implement the thought, then the responsibility to make that implementation work is yours. Freedom of speech. If you criticize someone, you should also be able to defend yourself and say, this is the reason why I'm criticizing someone, and my criticism is valid for so and so reasons. Similarly, free will. You exercise your free will. Your parents will say, why don't you go and do engineering? And you'll say, I don't want to. Then you should be able to take on the responsibility of the consequences of your decision. If things go according to plan, it is fine. But if they don't go according to plan, it is not fine. The same thing with the free market. You might have a free market there, but there's a great deal of responsibility both on those who are selling and those who are buying. So while we say that these are all freedoms, freedoms come with responsibilities. And in an individualist society, there is no support to the individual who exercises his or her freedom. All these are those which put the responsibility squarely on the individual. No one else can be blamed. Now, Hobbes was like a bulldozer. If you read Hobbes, he doesn't like something, he bulldozes his way through. Okay, he doesn't mince words, he doesn't spare anyone. He is somebody who will, he's like a military man, passion regardless. That is a motto of the military. Okay, you want to do something, so you just go, passion. Hobbes was like that, and because of that, he made enemies out of everyone. He made enemies out of the church. He made enemies out of the kings and the princes. He made enemies out of the common people as well because of his brashness. But Locke is not like that. Locke is a very, very strategic thinker. He anticipates the problems that his arguments can bring up, and he is ready with a strategy to overcome those objections or rebuttals of his arguments. So he already had a plan in mind as to how he's going to deal with his critics. He, meaning Locke, is credited with the idea of toleration of opposition, or toleration of opposition to ideas which are his, and overcoming that opposition through logical argumentation, or by giving logical arguments which will prove him to be right and prove his opponents to be wrong. This he was able to do because of the fact that he thought through an idea properly. He had a very good inkling of where opposition would come from, what kind of opposition would come, and he had arguments ready, very logical arguments ready to overcome that opposition. That is what sets him apart, not just from Hobbes, but from many other thinkers. He's supposed to be the progenitor of this particular idea of liberal surmounting of opposition. Some people call it an idea. Some people call it a method. Okay. But whatever you call it, it is the same thing. You can call it an idea. You can call it a method. But it is, the content doesn't change. Liberal surmounting of opposition is something that first says tolerate opposition. Tolerate opposition. which doesn't mean accept opposition. It says, let the other person speak. Let the other person speak. Let him state his objections to the ideas that you have proposed. Let him speak. And after that person finishes speaking, then you will basically say, you're wrong for so and so reasons. Here is the logic of my argument. Think logically. Think logically, and you will find that you're wrong and that I am right. That is what is called the liberal surmounting of opposition. So why is a liberal called a liberal? That is the thing. Liberalism is a philosophy, but liberalism is not one school of thought. Okay, it's not one school of thought. There are so many schools of thought in liberalism. So much so that just as Locke has been called a classical political economist, you will also call him a classical liberal thinker. Because after that, different schools of liberalism have come into being. Different forms of liberal thinking have come into being. So liberalism is a very generic term. What does it mean? What it means is simply you're not getting angry when somebody opposes what you say, maintaining a calm demeanor. Let the person say what he has to say and logically argue, not angrily, not as if you're intolerant, but as somebody who is respectfully differing with you. That is how the liberal surmounting of opposition works. It's a respectful way of proving to people that, look, I have heard you, but I think you're not very right. You don't say, you're very wrong. What you're saying is wrong. What you're saying is nonsense. Even if it is nonsense, you won't say it is nonsense. Why? Because you will say, I think you're not very right. Let us consider the reasons. That is liberal surmounting. So liberalism, by and large, is a philosophical system which accepts opposition. It is not self-righteous. And if you're a true liberal, you may even accept that you are wrong and somebody else is right. You may. That is why liberalism has survived so many centuries. That is why liberalism is an umbrella under which so many different systems of thought flourish. So that is liberalism, and that started with John Locke and with this idea of respectfully surmounting opposition. Because he advocated this kind of a strategy, some people call him a cunning person. Some people say he's a deceptive thinker. His ideas are based in deception, cheating. Okay, that's what some people say. Some people here are mainly Marxists. Marxists accuse John Locke of being a cunning and deceptive person. But that is not a true argument. That is not a true argument at all. Okay, now he also believed, I'm just establishing what kind of a person Rawls is before I go into his philosophical system. Locke is somebody who believed that the best way to overcome poverty was through capitalism. Today, if somebody tells us capitalism is the best way to overcome poverty, we won't believe it. Why today? A few years after Locke, Rousseau disagreed with Locke, and he said capitalism is something that is not a solution to poverty. In fact, it creates a poverty of a different kind. Now here you have to understand history a little. By the time Locke is writing, two very powerful institutions, social institutions in Europe were waning as far as their power was concerned. One was the church. The church was losing its power thanks to the Reformation, thanks to the Protestant ethic. And the other is that the feudal professional guild that I talked to you about while we were discussing the medieval period, the feudal professional guild was also a system of control. If you remember in my last class, I think yesterday, I told you that what differentiates capitalism from all other pre-capitalist forms of society is that in capitalism, you have production for the sake of profit. Okay, I gave you the example of how anticipating a rush of buying during the festive seasons, people stock up an inventory so that when somebody comes to them, you can't say, sorry, I don't have this product. Because if you say that, then somebody else will benefit from that. Or you don't have it, let me try another shop. Let me go and see if they have something. That's why they stock up the inventory. Whereas the feudal system is an artisan system. There was no industrial revolution then. Who are artisans? Handloom weavers, potters, goldsmiths, blacksmiths. Okay, all these people are artisans. Now, in Europe and even in India for a very long time, there was the formation of a professional guild, which means all weavers used to come together. All goldsmiths used to come together. All carpenters used to come together. It was some kind of an association of carpenters or goldsmiths or blacksmiths or weavers or potters, whoever. And if you look at the surnames of many people, they still tell us about the profession that they originally had. There's a very famous Hollywood filmmaker. His name is John Carpenter, which means he descended from a family of carpenters. Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, his first wife, what was her name? Jemima Goldsmith. Though her father became a lord, but their early profession was that of a goldsmith. Then you have a surname like Builder. Okay. Blacksmiths, some people write blacksmith, some people just write smith. But these are all professions. So there was a thing called a professional guild. And what did this professional guild do? Because nobody is producing for profit. People, if they wanted something, they will approach. If they wanted something to be made out of wood, they would go and approach a carpenter and say, this is what I want. So that would be produced. So first comes the order and then comes the product. The professional guilds wanted to make sure that for their own survival, they don't have too much competition. So the formation of a guild was to ensure that you would limit competition. So your profession was hereditary. If you were born into a family of weavers, then by default, your profession is weaving. If you're born into a family of goldsmiths, by default, your profession is goldsmithy. If you were born into a family of a potter, by default, again, that is your profession. You couldn't say, look, I am not interested. I know I am born to a handloom weaver. I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in weaving cloth. If you don't mind, I will leave this and I'll go and do something else, which I find far more interesting. You couldn't say this. Why? Because one, the guild into which you were born wouldn't allow you to leave the guild. But in the unlikely event of you convincing the guild that you were born into to allow you to go free, the guild that you want to join will say, stop, no coming in. We are not letting you in. You don't belong here. So you would see that this is also a form of control over the individual. But what was good about both forms of control, there was one good thing about them, and that was the support and solidarity that an individual got from his social grouping. You would get support in times when things are adverse. You would get support in happy times. So there was a solidarity. So the individual never felt alone. When people ask me, how are you these days? I say, I'm a lonely old man. And I mean it because all my friends, nobody's here now. They've all left India and gone off. Some right after graduation, some after post graduation, and some with the Y2K bug that I talked to you about. The year 2002K. K for some reason is used as 1000. 43K means 43,000. Some people also say 43 grand. That is also 1000. Okay, so Y2K was year 2000. So, in anticipation of problems and to find a solution for that, so many people went abroad. So much so that I have no friends left here. So I say I'm a lonely old man. But if you were in a professional guild, you wouldn't be lonely. You wouldn't be, because there's social solidarity. Today, we are like islands. But in those days, they said no man is an island. Individualism brings this problem of having people who are without friends, without support. I don't have brothers and sisters. I don't have children. So my family consists only of three people: me, my wife, and my mother. So we don't really have too much support. But that was not the case then. There would be the guild to support you. There would be a community of the church that you go to that would support you. But at the beginning of the modern period, feudalism was fast disappearing. Why? because the kings taxed the peasants even when the agricultural produce was not very good. Please remember that an agricultural economy is at the mercy of the elements of nature. So you can have flood, you can have famine, or you can have everything perfectly all right. So if everything is perfectly all right, you can pay high taxes. But if you have a flood or a famine, then you can't pay high taxes. The kings didn't realize that. They kept on trying to squeeze the feudal nobility and the peasantry for more and more taxes. As a result, the whole of the English society became poor. Even the landlords became poor. So that was a different kind of a poverty, where everybody is becoming poor, including the king. And that is why the feudal guild basically slowly ceased to exist. Then you have the church, which had become so corrupt, they had the sale of indulgences. What was the sale of the indulgence? Indulgence is you doing something which you're not supposed to do according to the diktats of the Bible. So what do? You go to a priest and confess and say, listen, I did this, or I thought this, I had a bad thought. Even that you were supposed to confess to the church. There was nothing private. So the church became an extremely corrupt institution because it had everybody's secrets. Young women were blackmailed by priests for sexual favors because they would have confessed something and they would have said, listen, you confess that. If you don't want everybody to know, do what I'm asking of you. And that kind of a process culminated in this thing called the sale of indulgences. What is an indulgence? You've done something which is not supposed to be done according to the Bible. So what do? You pay the priest a certain amount of money. You pay the church a certain amount of money and you would be told, God has pardoned you. God has pardoned you. Go ahead. So make or commit more sins. Do things that are sinful again. Come back and pay money to the church and get God's pardon. So Martin Luther said, what kind of a thing is this? You are asking people to do what they want and giving them pardons by collecting money. That is the sale of indulgence. So Martin Luther led a revolution against the church. And that is why you have the birth of Protestantism. It was in protest. The Pope was not happy. He served what is called a papal bull. Papal comes from il papa. Bull is an order, actually. So he served an order to Martin Luther for defying the church and said, come and appear in front of me. Martin Luther said, I'm not coming. I don't care. I don't think you are a pious person. I will not bow my head before you. Till then, in European society, nobody had protested and said, I will not do what you want me to do. That is the Protestant ethic that Max Weber talks about. And Martin Luther went ahead and created reforms. And he said, you don't need these clergymen if you want to pray to God. Who is a clergyman? He's also a human being. He's also a human being. If he can talk to God, why can't you talk to God? You talk to God. You ask God what you want. If you've done something wrong, directly confess to God and ask for his pardon. You don't need this church as an intermediary. So that is the Reformation, and that is also synonymous with the idea of the Protestant ethic. So the dying embers of feudalism and the idea of a church which was increasingly not being accepted by the people, and several alternate churches came up. You had the Anglican Church, thanks to Henry VIII. You had the Lutheran Church. You had the Presbyterian Church. You had the Puritanical Church. All these things I should be explaining to you, but there is no time. The way your syllabus has been made, it just doesn't give me the time to explain all these things to you. Because it is out of all these things that capitalism was born. And how was capitalism born? What we are seeing today is the fourth phase of capitalism, okay, which is the service industry. The first phase of capitalism was called the mercantilist phase. Mercantile or merchant. We hear about Marco Polo coming to India. We hear about Marco Polo going to China. We hear about Europeans coming on the land route through Asia Minor. And when the Ottoman Turks conquered that and said, you are not going to pass from here, then people started finding sea routes to come to India. Why did they want to come to India? Because India was a prosperous country, far, far more prosperous than Europe, which was going through poverty. So merchants came here, bought things. They invested whatever money they had. They put them here. They bought things, took them back with them to their country and sold them there at a higher price. So what did they do? How much time did it take me to travel? How much expense did it take me to travel? How much did I pay for that particular article? I put all these things and I call it the cost price. Now, it will make no sense if I sell it at a price lesser than the cost price, or if I sell it at the cost price, because then I don't make any money. So what do? You will put the product up for sale at a price which is higher than the costs that you have incurred in getting that product. And look at the market. If you have to buy a kilo of groundnuts, it's not very expensive. If you buy a kilo of cashew nuts, then it is extremely expensive. Why? Because cashew nuts are not available in the same plentitude that you have of groundnuts. Groundnuts are available freely, they are there everywhere. Cashew nuts are not there everywhere. So, that particular factor in economics is called dearness. You say something is very dear to me, which means you like something. Okay, so whenever inflation is going up, the government gives you what is called a dearness allowance, which means that due to inflation, the costs of various products in the market are going up. And so that you can buy those products, the government also will increase your dearness allowance, which is a part of your salary. Okay, you have a basic salary, then you have the dearness allowance, then you have the house rent allowance. So this is all capitalism. Something that is dearer is more expensive. If you require a medicine and if it is in shortage, the medical shop fellow might tell you, I will not sell it to you for less than a certain price. But it is a medicine, you require it. And when you require it, you are willing to pay more for it. That is the dearness. Okay. So that is how capitalism came into being. It came out of the dying throes of feudalism and also because of the Protestant ethic and the Reformation, for which Martin Luther was responsible. Because of that, capitalism came into being. And like I said the other day, though these things didn't directly happen in England, thanks to King Henry VIII converting the whole of England into a Protestant country, you find that the Industrial Revolution happened in England. And that is why England went far, far ahead of other European countries, thanks to the Industrial Revolution. What did the Industrial Revolution do? It produced products with consistent quality in greater numbers at cheaper cost prices. So you could become very, very competitive in a capitalist market. And since feudalism was dying and capitalism was showing this potential, it was showing this potential to generate social wealth. Okay, if there is greater money in society with individuals, and that also is an increase in social wealth. That is why we talk about gross domestic product, gross national income, per capita income, all these indices or indexes, as the Americans like to say, all these come into being, and you know how to control the economy. So capitalism showed a way out of poverty in Lockean times. The society that was going through its final throes of death, a feudal society, that came to life thanks to capitalism. And capitalism generated social wealth. And therefore, Locke believed that capitalism is a solution to poverty. It is not just at that time. If you read somebody like Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand, she says even today capitalism is a solution to poverty. I don't know if you've done this in your economics. You should have. You're in your final year. There is a thing called a trickle-down effect. Okay, maybe some people are getting very rich, but those riches will trickle down. So that also improves the position of those people who are not as rich as others. Well, I belong to that generation of people who saw television come for the first time. Okay, when television came for the first time, there used to be a Hindi film shown on Saturday and a Telugu film being shown on Sunday. Very few houses had television sets. Very few houses, and they were black and white. Okay, till the 9th Asian Games of 1982, there was no color television in India. The first television studio that was set up was in 1959 in Delhi. The second studio that was set up was in 1974 in Bombay. And there was only terrestrial transmission. So every house had an antenna. Hyderabad got its television station because of the fact that this city was a part of an experiment called SITE, which was satellite information, some education. Okay. As a part of that thing, when the satellite was no longer available, they started terrestrial transmission. So throughout the week, we used to get programs which were aimed at farmers. And there used to be programs only for 1 hour, 1.5 hours. Okay. It was only on Saturday and Sunday that films were there. When television came, we were not among the first families to buy it. So we went and sat in other people's houses and saw the films. If a friend had a TV, we used to go to that friend's house. And there used to be these hordes of people trying to find a house that had a television. They simply used to go and plonk themselves on the floor of the house to watch the film. So when we finally got our own TV set, my maidservant, her daughters, her daughters' friends, some 50 people used to occupy my entire drawing room, waiting for the film. Now, go to Dharavi, the biggest slum in Asia. Every little room, even if somebody is living in a room which is 4 feet by 5 feet, there is a television there. And it's a color television. It has a satellite connection. You get to see satellite channels. It's there now. That's called the trickle-down effect. So Locke believed in that, the trickle-down effect. And therefore, he believed that it was a solution to poverty. Today, people going to someone else's house to see television programs is inconceivable. Everybody has a television set. For so many years, we didn't have a phone because if you applied for a phone, you would get it after 20 years, 25 years. And so there were no phones. If we had to make a phone call, we used to go to a shop that had a phone, pay that shopkeeper a certain amount of money, make a phone call. Now, landlines have become redundant. Everybody has a cell phone. India has the second highest number of cell phone subscribers. The highest is China. That's because of the population. And cellular telephony rates are the cheapest in the world in India. So you see, what was once considered to be a luxury, having a telephone, now everybody has it. Who doesn't have a telephone? Everybody has a cell phone. My driver has, my maidservant has. If I need to talk to them, I just need to make a call. So That's why Locke believed in the potential of capitalism. He believed that capitalism would facilitate the overcoming of poverty. He was also a product of the Enlightenment age, the Renaissance, and he belonged to this school of thought which is called the rationalist school of thought or the rational thinking school. Enlightenment, the age of enlightenment, created this rational thinking school. Eric Hobsbawm has written a book on that. You should read it. He belonged to this school. So, I'll just finish this and we'll call it a day. John Locke's two very seminal works. These are not just the two works that he wrote, by the way. Okay, he wrote many essays and all that kind of thing. But two things that everybody should know. The two works of his is an essay concerning human understanding that changed the entire paradigm of thinking. It changed the entire paradigm of thinking. Forget politics, forget economics. It went right up to the idea of what is the mind. It changed the idea of the mind that people had. It was no longer what Plato said. We are born with innate knowledge. No, it wasn't even what Aristotle said, that our logical thinking happens through analogical examples. Analogical are similar examples. We say, oh, that kind of a thing happened in this kind of a situation, so that is how this will happen here. That is how he said we'll get knowledge. But Locke said, no, you're born with an empty mind. When you're born, there's nothing in your mind. It is through your senses, through sense perception and through cognition, two qualities, that you slowly accumulate knowledge. So that is why people say, with age comes wisdom. I don't believe in it. Okay. We think that we are getting older, and as we are getting older, we think we are getting wiser. No, we are just getting old. Wisdom doesn't come with age. I've seen some extremely young people who are very, very, very wise, and I've seen some very old people who have tremendous qualifications attached to their names, who have anything but wisdom. This changed the way people looked at human thought and the idea of learning. It changed. It created an entirely new philosophical system. And it became the reason why positivism and empiricism came into being. you'll find that John Locke's influence is there not just in Europe, it's there even in America. He's a very revered figure in America, perhaps more revered in America than he is in Europe. And you find his influences on thinkers like Santayana, Henry James, John Dewey, and Richard Rorty. You find influences. That doesn't mean they accept everything he says, but somewhere they are responding to him. Somewhere they are responding to him. And because of the liberal surmounting method that was used by Locke, people said he is somebody who is very deceptive. That is wrong. Deceptive is you hide things. Locke wasn't hiding anything. Locke was putting everything out in the open. He was putting everything out in the open. His next important work, especially for those who are into political economy, is the Two Treatises of Government. The first treatise is addressed to an English philosopher who went by the name of Robert Filmer, Filmer. Robert Filmer was a staunch supporter of the idea of divine right and of the idea of monarchy. And Locke disagreed with him. He said there is no such thing as divine right, and there should be no such thing as monarchy. He refuted them both. The second treatise is where he put his thoughts out. Now, George Sabine, about whom I talked to you yesterday, basically says Locke wasted his time in attacking Filmer. He should not have attacked Filmer. After all, Filmer was talking something which was antiquated. Why waste his time attacking Filmer? He said he should have attacked Hobbes, because Hobbes was this irrational, illogical figure who suddenly says people are in a state of nature, they shoot up like mushrooms and they fight with each other, and life is solitary, nasty, brutish and short, but they are rational and they come together and create a social contract. So George Sabine didn't understand the fact that what Hobbes was doing was an experimental method. He thought he was talking about a chronological state of nature, which it wasn't. So he says he should have attacked Hobbes. But Locke learnt a lot from Hobbes. Locke had two advantages. One, he saw what happened to Hobbes when Hobbes took this cavalier approach and said, this is how we will basically look at sovereignty. taking away of rights, establishment of a state and a society. He learnt that he couldn't do such a thing. Then people won't listen to him. And the other advantage that he had was history. Both capitalism and concomitantly liberalism showed potential for greater improvement, which Hobbes couldn't see because they were not there in his time. But being born later than Hobbes, Locke was able to see things that Hobbes didn't see. So, by taking these two things into consideration, Hobbes's experience of stating things brashly and seeing the potential of capitalism and the potential of rational thinking, he said, I will have a different approach. Why will he attack Hobbes? Because he is indebted to Hobbes. His basic political philosophy is something that comes out of the Hobbesian social contract. He refined it, changed it, made it more acceptable to people. Yes, but why will he attack Hobbes? He's learning from Hobbes, he's learned from Hobbes, so he won't attack him. So we'll stop here today. Tomorrow we'll pick up the other things. No, tomorrow 11 o'clock I have to do whatever Prashant wanted, some kind of career counseling. So should I put that link on your this thing, Prashant?